Psychologists, what are some of the creepiest mental conditions you have ever encountered? Nurse here. First patient that thought she was the devil scared the shit out of me. You get used to people who also think they're the devil and become numb to all the weird crap they do. A lot of people know about phantom limb syndrome, in which someone continues to feel as if their limb is still there after it has been amputated, often in great pain. Another interesting one that not many people know about and is almost kind of an opposite is body integrity identity disorder, which is when a person has extremely strong feelings that one or more of their limbs does not belong to them, despite being functional, and often they really want to amputate. From their descriptions, it seems that it is actually very psychologically painful, sometimes to the point that they will self-amputate because no doctor is willing to Reactive attachment disorder. I worked at a group home for kids with this disorder and it was creepy before I fully understood it. Children who have suffered severe abuse and neglect early in life often have their ability to form healthy attachments to caregivers or anyone destroyed. Some of them would cling to me, call me mommy, and beg to come home with me 30 seconds after I met them. Others would refuse to talk to anyone, hurt themselves and others, set fires and act out any chance they could. Sometimes they would improve enough to be sent to foster homes only to have their behavior come back worse once they were placed in an unstructured family setting. It's extremely tragic. Fatal familial insomnia is pretty freaking scary. Suddenly, you just start not being able to fall asleep and you're gone within 7 to 36 months. You gradually lose the ability, along with a number of other symptoms over time, until it eventually, at the end of the last stage, you'll have not slept in a long time, will have been hallucinating and suffering from dementia, and eventually die. Only 40 families, about 100 people, have the disorder. Also, if you have it, there's a good chance you'll have kids by its onset, making the disorder pass down ever further. Scary stuff. I live with a long-time friend who I am convinced is developing/has developed disorganized schizophrenia over the past 3 years. It's not as crazy or mind-blowing as some of the other ones on this thread, but it is truly fucking up his life and making it exponentially harder for me to tolerate him on a daily basis. More bizarre than anything. In the past couple of months, especially, he has exhibited extremely antisocial and disorganized behavior. Everything from inappropriate emotional reactions to regular life events to an inability to form complete sentences or thoughts in a conversation to just plain old fucking around with people by not making any sense, sometimes on purpose and sometimes unknowingly. He used to be an extremely personable guy who could approach anyone and make friends. Now he literally can't hold a conversation, but still wants to be really approachable and personable, but doesn't realize that he actually creeps people out so much that they will passionately avoid talking. Trading thing that he does is basically attaches to me whenever I'm at home. He will stand at my bedroom door and watch me do my homework, fold my laundry, clean my room, work on my computer, build Legos, etc. And he will always be in the same room as I am unless I have shut my bedroom door. He mimics my actions, wakes up whenever I do, goes to sleep whenever I do, always wants to cook or clean whenever I am. I essentially have to find things that he can't or doesn't know how to do to get some freedom. It's mostly me because I've known him for way longer than my roommates, but when I'm not home, he does all of this to them too. I think this all stems from his inability to make basic decisions, like when to eat, or where to study, or when to leave in order to be on time for something. This extends to almost every aspect of his life. I've been seeing a counselor to consult with her about it, but it's basically impossible to know anything for sure because she can't tell me any information about him or his visits. He started going as well. I don't know if he goes to them unless I ask him, and there's not telling when he will forget about a session or just decide not to go to a doctor's evaluation. It's even more frustrating that this counselor keeps telling me that I shouldn't keep reminding him of these things or keeping tabs on him, because eventually I will be like a mother taking care of an infant child. My words, not hers, and she is right, but it is upsetting. Weirdest part, he's studying behavioral neuroscience. TL Doctor, I've been friends with my roommate for over a decade. In the past 3 years he has developed disorganized schizophrenia right in front of my eyes, and there's nothing I can do about it. Sometimes, as a means of treating severe seizures/epilepsy, surgeons will sever the corpus callosum, the connecting tissue between the two lobes of the brain. The good news is that future full-blown seizures are limited to one half of the brain, leaving the patient aware and able to take precautionary measures. The bad news is that, thanks to the lateralization of function, there are essentially two minds in the skull that can each only react to certain forms of stimuli. Patients usually develop workarounds, though. The weirdest part is the occasional outcome of alien hand syndrome, in which one of the brains takes control of one hand and uses it independently. When questions are presented to the controlling hemisphere, the hand can write out its answers, which are sometimes in disagreement with the main brain and the patient's spoken answers. It's been a while since I've studied abnormal psych, so the details might be a little fuzzy. In either a psych major or a psychologist, however, I did spend a week in a mental ward. I had depression, I told a cop I wanted to kill myself in a fit of rage, etc., etc. The hospital I was at was divided. One side was Group A, folks who needed treatment but were considered safe. Group B was the folks that had to be watched a lot more closely. About 2 days after I was checked in, another woman had come in too. She was placed in Group A, and was placed as my roommate. At first she seemed nice and normal-ish, but after a few hours, her stories were getting mixed up. I mean, she came in, found out I had a kid, then said she had a daughter as well who lived with her mother-in-law or something. After dinner, the story was her daughter had been brutally murdered by her father and that the woman didn't even care. I voiced my concerns to the nurses, but was told to just go to bed, in the same room with her. It took a while for me to fall asleep that night because my sleep schedule was all sorts of fucked up. I think I passed out around midnight. We were put to bed at 8 p.m. I'm not sure how long I was asleep for before I was woken up to my roommate strangling me. Now, we were placed in the last room at the end of the hall, far from the nurse's desk. Plus, I was being strangled, so I couldn't even yell for help. I thought I was going to die, but I had fallen asleep with a book. So I bashed the book on my roommate's head and booked it out of the room. The nurses probably thought I was the super crazy one, yelling at them. I'm not sure they would have believed me if it wasn't for the fact I had hand marks around my neck. My roommate was transferred to the other side of the ward, locked up with limited time out of her room. I never bothered to ask what her deal was. I didn't want to know. I had a new roommate by the end of the day, a really nice older lady who was a lesbian. I told her about crazy roommate Ash 1 and we would just shoot the shit for hours at night until I was ready to pass out.
I'm not a psychologist, but I was in a mental institution for attempt suicide. Lots of bad things had happened to lead me to that choice. Please don't judge. But, as I was saying, there was this girl there, named Anna, and she would comb her hair in the morning and talk to herself. Sometimes she would start to violently scream at herself. One time she grabbed her hair as if it wasn't her pulling it, and forcefully bashed her head repeatedly into the mirror screaming, "Love Maine! Love Maine!" And at night she would start to play with herself and scream her father's name. I have never been so scared in my life. This girl Anna was only 15. Her father would rape and abuse her. The mother was Geetan also. I never want to relive that ever again. The selfish love/obsession of the teen with severe borderline personality disorder. This girl got hold of a razor and carved a boy's name, let's call him Steve, 10 times into various parts of her body. Then she had sex with another boy so that she could get pregnant, have an abortion, tell her friends that the child was Steve's, and that Steve had pressured her to have the abortion. All this time she had been spying nightly on Steve, had fake installed cameras in his house while he wasn't there to make sure he wasn't dating anyone else, and had introduced herself to every one of Steve's close family members as Steve's girlfriend while Steve wasn't around. The kicker: Steve didn't know this girl. He vaguely recalled meeting her once, but didn't know her name until I sought him out. He knew someone was pretending to be his girlfriend, but didn't know who. I'm a psychology major, but this story does not have to do with my schooling. To put myself through school, I work as a receptionist at a swimming pool, and Thursday is the day when individuals with disabilities and mental disorders come to the pool with their workers. I was on the other side of the counter helping the individuals into the change rooms, and one of the clients grabbed my hair and started screaming at me that it was too beautiful and she needed to take it. One of the single most upsetting moments of my life, because after her worker managed to get her to relinquish my hair, she continued to just scream wordlessly until I was no longer in her sight. Wife is a psychologist. She says shared delusional disorder. Woman and her mother had paranoid delusions about mom's ex-husband and were convinced he was stalking them and breaking into their house. The ex had gotten the woman's son, aged 6, a modeling contract, and they thought that every picture of a kid in a magazine was him. The images that didn't look like him, they claimed, were photoshopped. This was so weird and creepy since two people shared the same delusions. When I was younger, I was a pretty unstable kid, which led to multiple stays in a youth psych ward. One of the times I was in, we got a boy who looked like a 14-year-old Federer, Puller, Creepier, Jack White. So we find out that he threatened to kill and eat his school principal, which even to a bunch of suicidal teens was psycho as fuck. I slightly felt bad for him, because obviously he was messed up in the head, way more than us at least. But he would say all of these awkward things trying to be funny that ended up sounding like serial killer quotes, like, "Do you ever wonder what it feels like to be dead, eat someone?" Which, especially to the girls, was freaky as fuck. So after my roommate gets out, I hear Hannibal Lecter is moving into my room. It's weird, but I just brush it off. I was 250 pounds 5 to 10 and he was just him. So a few nights go by, nothing weird. And every once in a while when he made a fucked up joke, they would pull him aside and tell him to chill out. But one day, I don't see him and one of the doctors calls me in. They tell me he is in his own room in solitary now. They pull out his notebooks and it is filled of his drawings of me while I sleep, fantasy drawings of him fucking me, killing me, eating me, and pages of ramblings on how he would fuck me or how I would taste. It is literally the entire notebook front to back filled with these drawings and writings. I am so petrified that I don't talk or leave my room for days. He apparently got sent to a long-term center far away. But I ended up staying even longer since I thought I would kill myself over that. But that's the story. Never saw or heard from him again. Still think about it all the time. It's hard to sleep around other people anymore. I was a preschool teacher in college. One year, one of my students was a 5-year-old girl who came to my after-school class, who enrolled mid-semester after was taken into foster care. It was discovered that her father would bring home women and rape them in front of her. The bastard would tie her to the bedpost at the foot of the bed and use duct tape to hold her head up so she had to watch. He did this so many times over the course of 2 years that a bald spot eventually formed on the crown of her head. When she came to my classroom for the first time, she came up to me and said hello. She kept her head tilted down so she had to strain her eyes to look up at me as if she was still stuck to the bedpost. This is how she spoke to people the entire school year. She pulled out her hair when it grew back to keep the bald spot there. After that semester, I resigned from the school and changed my major. I was once in a party and joined this group of people, of which I knew just one person. He introduced me to the others one by one, and when I arrived at the least one, Noah, I shook his hand and petted his shoulder. He grabbed my arm and flipped it around and almost snapped it. Needless to say, it was the most awkward situation in my life, and even thinking about it makes me cringe my teeth. I learned then Noah had been in Afghanistan and he freaked out when something or someone touched him from his back.